Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I am joined by my partner in crime, Scott. Don't call me Schultzy. Scott, we're now on episode 25 of these. If you can believe it, we've done 25 of these episodes so far, and unfortunately, our inaugural season didn't coincide with a winning Bengals season, but still a lot to talk about this week. How are things going? It sounds like last week you kind of were a little worried you're under the weather, and maybe it sounds like you got a little bit of the sniffles going.
Yeah, I was just starting to get, come down with something. So I flooded myself with vitamin C and seem to be coming out of it. And amazing, I didn't realize this was 25. So I'm kind of wondering that's what diamond. So I don't know if Rebecca or the guys at Cincy Jungle are going to get us some diamond jewelry or something for that.
Yeah, we get some bling. We need it. We need it. So, you know, it's kind of funny because we've chronicled a lot of different things on this show so far in this kind of wacky Bengals season, and now we're in a major off-season upheaval. A lot, as I mentioned, a lot to talk to, both with the Bengals and kind of around centering around some of the major league issues as well. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to be taking your fan questions. So we are live on our YouTube channel, so check us out there. We're also live once again on Cincy Jungle. We're excited that we kind of have a multi-platform thing going on there. So we're excited to have all of you join us. We've got a number of viewers already tuning in live, and we appreciate that. Scott, let's kick it off with last week we kicked off positional reviews and maybe some outlook on the on Cincinnati's team, and we're kind of going unit by unit, probably something we'll be doing over the next handful of weeks. So as we do that, let's look at the defensive line, and that seems to kind of be a hot topic here. Obviously, the Bengals have two Pro Bowl type of players in Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap. They have a guy they really like, and a lot of fans like as a guy, in Michael Johnson, but the numbers just aren't there. They drafted Andrew Billings last year. Domata Pico is a free agent coming up this year. So what is your take on the defensive line? And before I get to that, we've been talking about draft and all of that stuff as well, Scott. And we did get a comment from, I didn't get the name, but the Richards is either the first name or the last name. And he wrote us an email at the obinsider at gmail.com. I feel like spending a first-round pick on an offensive skill player, such as a wide receiver, does wonders. Look at what happened when we spent a number 4 pick at wide receiver. That being said, I think they will go defense at number 9. But to add something extra, let's look at this. If our coaches are confident in our defense going into 2017 with Billings and William Jackson coming back, do we see a first-round running back as a possibility? So running back's another thing, but I wanted to touch on that, not only because we appreciate the fan feedback, but do you still see number 9 as a defensive player, maybe an edge rusher for the Bengals going forward here as they look to maybe retool a number of different units on their squad?
I guess I definitely see it as a best player available because as the question in the email talked about AJ Green being number 4 pick. Obviously, he was a huge pick, a huge addition to the team. But if you go back a decade before that, I think we used the number 4 pick on Peter Warwick. That didn't work out so well. So I think it depends on who that guy is. So I wouldn't want to say, defensive end just for the sake of defensive end. I mean, if the guy has a second-round grade but is the 3rd defensive end in the draft and he's the 3rd one taken, I would say, heck no, or purgatory, hell no even. But, if he's a stud, like number 9, elite, yes, this guy's worth the pick, then I'm all for it. I guess I wouldn't want to say, let's grab a defensive guy just for the sake of him being a defensive guy. I want to make sure that, yes, this is someone who is really worthy of that spot. And if he is, then I am going to trust the front office who spends more time scouting than I do, and a lot of us do as kind of amateur scouts who don't get the same level, that they do as far as the interviews and seeing them in person in the pro. I mean, we get videos, but it's not quite the same thing. And so, yeah, if they determine that one of these guys is truly a number 9 guy, then yeah, I'm definitely behind it. But I don't want to take him just because he's a defensive end or a linebacker, or
It's kind of a weird situation that the Bengals are in, because you look at them and you go, okay, there's still a big chunk of a decent core that's there on both sides of the football. Geno Atkins had a 9-sack season this year and made the Pro Bowl. Carlos Dunlap didn't have quite the season he had in 2015, but was still a solid player. The pass rush was far more inconsistent this year than it was in years past, but it did pick up at the end of the year. And then now you've got Andrew Billings, who isn't known as a pass rusher, but did have about, I think in his senior year, 5.5 sacks from the defensive tackle position. And he probably looks slated to step into Domata Pecco's role next to Geno Atkins there. And then obviously they want to utilize rotation. Here's my thing, and I think I said this last week when we're talking about positions and all of that with the draft and what the Bengals might want to do at number 9. You look at it and you go, okay, so if you have a chance to get sitting at chances are the Bengals aren't going to move up from number 9. If anything, they'll gather picks and move back, or more likely stay put. So my stance is, if you have the chance, if it's an offensive player, and you look at it and you say we could use a wide receiver, and as the gentleman Richards emailed us, they might need a running back as well, especially if one of those dynamic guys, Leonard Fournette or Dalvin Cook, are available there. If you have a chance to get a number 1 or number 2 best player at a respective position in the draft at your spot, rather than we need a defensive end. We need a defensive end, and he's maybe the 3rd or 4th best consensus player on a lot of people's boards at that position. Granted, he's probably still a good football player, but I kind of think you still got to mix need with value, like you said, Scott. I think if you have the chance to get a top player at a respective position, I think you kind of leap at the chance, even if it doesn't jump off of the paper as a position that is a glaring need. I mean, the Bengals did it a few years back with Tyler Eifert. Everybody was like, what? Why did they get another tight end? They can't even use one properly. And they grabbed another. And Eifert, granted, he's been injured a lot, but he's been a good red zone target when he's been healthy, and a good player when healthy. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think a lot of it is then talking about defensive end or edge rusher. I know on the Cincy Jungle website, the kid out of Tennessee has been mentioned quite a bit, assuming that the kid from Texas A&M will be gone. The kid from Alabama will probably be gone. So then the next one in the list, number 3, is to kind of to your point, okay, he's number 3 overall. And I think one thing I tend to look at is as far as memory or history goes, is look at someone and kind of get like an overall grade. So, okay, let's say the kid from Tennessee, he's number 3. Where would he have gone, in the last 3, 4, 5 drafts? If he was in one of those drafts, would he have been, up there with Joey Bosa last year? Would he have been up really high? Or, in a defensive end heavy draft, would he have been a guy who was end of the 1st, early 2nd? And if it comes back that, this he could be the number 3, but maybe this is a year where there's 3, stud elite number 3 defensive ends. If that's the case, I'm cool with it. If it just turns out that, there just aren't very many good defensive ends, and the number 3 this year would be equal to like the number 7 last year, then part of my best player available philosophy would say absolutely stay away, just because you don't have the overall value. If you kind of look at, year in, year out, you're building a roster, for the long haul and not necessarily for need. And granted, the Bengals have needs, but, they're always going to have a need, even if they, a couple years ago when they were in the middle of this 5-year consecutive playoff run. And I remember we were having the discussion on the website about the need, and there was really no perceived need, but there's always going to be a need. And I guess my thought is, just, how does this guy stack up overall? If they truly think that, he grades as, someone who should be worthy of a number 9 pick, then I'm all for it. And I can't remember the year. It might have been 2009, when there was something like 4 or 5 really good running backs all came out the same year. I think it was the Chris Johnson, Ray Rice, Matt Forte, the year they all came out, and there were a couple more in that.
Brian Leonard.
Who else?
Brian Leonard.
Yeah. So if you get the number 5 running back that year, you could have gotten someone like, if you're telling me, Matt Forte is the number 5 guy, then well, that's a heck of a number 5, because some years your number 5 guy, might be someone like, I don't know. I keep thinking Buster Keaton. Curtis Keaton.
Oh yeah.
I was trying to think of it, or Brian Milne. So, it just really depends, I think, on how that guy grades overall. And it will be interesting, because I know with like the guy from Tennessee, he doesn't seem to match the Bengals mold. And I think we talked on this last week of would they get past that mentality of, this guy needs to be 6'6", 280 if he has speed, because we need that speed. And hard to know how they're going to rate or evaluate these guys.
Yeah, and I agree with you. That's a good point about the running backs. However, Matt Forte was a second-round pick, if I remember correctly, and was the 5th or 6th. And then again, you then that breeds the conversation of positional value in the draft. Running backs have been devalued in recent years, whereas defensive ends and offensive tackles, quarterbacks, those are the guys that tend to go high. We did get an interesting comment from Evan Hill in our YouTube live chat. And he kind of, it sounds like he agrees with both of us, but he says for a top 10 pick, you need to have an impact starter. None of this let him learn picks. And so I mean that's kind of been the Achilles heel of the Bengals in recent drafts. They've kind of had a luxury of kind of draft and develop these guys, but now all of a sudden when they have a down year, they lose some players in free agency. These guys are, these greenhorns that haven't had enough time all of a sudden get tossed into roles, or the coaches just don't trust them even 2-3 years into their careers. And that's a shame. I will say this, kind of going back to my point about why I don't like the idea of the Bengals maybe getting a consensus number 3, number 4 positional player at number 9. It harkens back to a lot of their drafting that occurred in the 90s. They were so desperate for certain players. Their team was so bad, and they, if you remember back, Scott, you and I are a little bit older on the Bengals fan spectrum. Not to put you on the spot there, but if you remember what Plan B free agency was, it's no longer in effect. But that absolutely fleeced that Bengals team that was so good in the late 80s and early 90s. And so what happened after that, the Bengals had to scramble in the draft. They obviously didn't have the same product on the field. They had a bunch of high picks. And so what they had to do is they would have to maybe settle for guys that weren't necessarily the best player at their position, even though they had a high pick. And it really hurt them for a long time. And then obviously coaching issues and other development issues were an issue with the team. But at number 9, it's always interesting. Side note, I live in Southern California. My brother teaches at a local high school, and a lot of prospects were working out at the high school he teaches and coaches at. Deshaun Watson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and a number of others were there. Working with Jordan Palmer, if you can believe that. So very interesting that was happening. I think Jordan Palmer's post-NFL career now is helping guys get ready for the draft and things like that. So it's going to be interesting to see. And I know the draft is always fun for a lot of people, Scott. A lot of people follow it. A lot of people try and analyze it. I think this year, because of where the Bengals are picking and how high they're picking in all of the rounds, it makes it a bit more exciting when the Bengals come on the clock this year, because these are guys, as commenter Evan said in the YouTube chat, these are guys that should come in and be impact guys immediately, either as starters or role players, right?
Yeah, and for a fan watching the draft, it's great because first off, you're not waiting 4 hours for the Bengals to pick.
Right.
Normally a draft starts at 7. You're kind of, but you kind of have to watch casually because there's that 1 in a million chance they'll trade up.
Yeah,
and you'll miss it. So yeah, but normally they're picking 24th, 25th, and so yeah, you're kind of sitting forever. And even your most casual fan, because they follow college football or they kind of follow some of the draft, build up. They know the top few names, and Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin were 1, 2, and you kind of know, okay, yeah, I've heard of Cam Newton or some of his people, but then you get down to the mid-20s and it's, a left guard or a strong safety. So you don't have the same excitement. I think a lot of people your hardcore fans last year knew who William Jackson III was. I'm sure some casual people who follow the Bengals may not follow college or the NFL or the draft might have thought, "Oh, Houston has a team. Who knew?"
Yeah, right. Well, Bengals fans know because of David Klingler, obviously.
Yeah.
So that's how they know about the University of Houston football team. Bengals fans, we talked about the defensive line. Scott, what's the one position you want to see? We talked draft. We've taken these questions. What's the one position you want to see potentially upgraded, whether it's by a guy that's already on the team or one they need to bring in? What's the one position in that front four that you want to see upgraded?
I would have to say right defensive end, only because
Really? Okay.
obviously with Dunlap and Atkins, we're pretty well set. I was a big believer in Andrew Billings last year, so I'm going to make the assumption that, and I understand Marvin Lewis is going to bring Petco back and make him the starter, but assuming that doesn't happen, and assuming Billings gets a chance, or Deshaun Watson, or not Watson, Williams gets a chance, or Brandon Thompson even as a backup, I think they have enough depth, especially with Billings. I can't speak highly enough of him at the nose tackle, that the most lacking position would be the Michael Johnson position, which is essentially Robert Gathers, guy who's going to keep getting playing time, keep getting run out there. Yeah, he's good against the run. He'll get you a sack, maybe once a month. A very typical Marvin Lewis player. That's the one position I would like to see. Oh, the front four, I'd love to see upgraded. And if it wasn't for Billings on the depth chart, I'd say nose tackle. But even if I did, they wouldn't play him because it'd be a first-round play or a first-year player.
I agree with you on Billings. I was high on him, and I know a lot of people viewed him as maybe a two-down type of defensive tackle, but he is an absolute workhorse in the weight room. He actually has a bit. He has a bit of a. I think he's got a bigger pass rush ability than people give him credit for, based on some of the numbers I saw in college. But I think I'm probably in agreement with you. I don't know if it's necessarily the starter right defensive end position. I want to see a guy, especially because of Lewis's penchant for not playing young guys right away. But I do want to see a guy that's maybe a younger, more active Wallace Gilberry type, and obviously more talented and more productive type. And maybe that kid from Tennessee is that guy who can kind of mix around and do things. But that's what made this front so formidable, is the rotation that they used up front and the ability to kick some of those big defensive ends inside, use guys on the edge, maybe use Wallace Gilberry in the middle from time to time as well. With the age on that defensive line, I think if you can get some speed and some ability out off the edge, I think that's going to be a big thing that I want to see them improve. The problem is I don't know if it'll be at number 9 in the second round or where they maybe go, but I do think they add a pass rusher of some kind. Who would you like to see them have at number 9, Bengals fans? You can get in touch with us at Bengals OBI on Twitter. We just read an email from our email account from a few already. You can leave comments after the fact on YouTube as well, or when we post the show on Cincy Jungle through SB Nation. We're also on SoundCloud, so check us out there, and we're also on iTunes for download, and all of our content is available in those platforms. So we appreciate the subscribers. We appreciate all of the support we've received in these handful of months in our inaugural year of this show. We appreciate it. Scott, we're going to move on. We talked about, I don't know how many readers have really divulged into all the stuff we've been putting out on Cincy Jungle, but I've been doing a series of seasonal awards and kind of most valuable player here and most improved player and all of that, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from readers on that. The one you liked specifically this week, and it kind of plays into a little bit of what we're talking about with the defensive line and assessing that, your defensive most valuable player, and this isn't just the defensive line, obviously it's the entire unit. There's kind of a lot of different opinions on it, and I had the same kind of issue when I made the offensive most valuable player, in that do you look at the most valuable player as the guy who's always on the field and racking up the stats, the awesome player who maybe misses a handful of games, but you see the difference when they're off the field, whether it's injury or suspension or whatever, or guys that really stepped up and played well either in a new role or for somebody that's been injured? Who would you give that nod to this year, the defensive MVP for the Bengals?
Well, and I think you kind of alluded to the really good point that I don't think there's one absolute hands down winner, which is why I think we did have some of the discussion we had, because if you look at the main candidates, you have someone like Perfect, who when he's on the field is definitely a game changer. I mean, that defense looks so different when he's out there, just his instincts, the plays he makes, the intensity. I mean, he's just that, just totally changes that defense when he comes on. You get someone like, Geno Atkins, who's probably the best player out there. So it's really hard to, not vote for him, especially since you figure Burfict missed time. Well, then you have someone like Drake Kirkpatrick, and he was, without him, that defensive secondary could have been a total mess. So you look at, what you could have been with or without him. And so there's so many different ways you could go. And then you have Dunlap, who obviously is still a very good defensive end, Pro Bowl last year, I think, that again this year. So for me, if I was picking one, if Burfict had played more games, I'd have to go Burfict just because the way he changes that defense. But he just missed so much time this year that I think I would probably go with Geno Atkins, just because, and not just because I have a jersey, just for full disclosure, just the idea that the things that he can do, the double teams he commands, the way he can get push, on the interior. I just think without him, that defense would, as much as they struggled the first half of the year, I just think they would be much worse. I just, for his position and his rank in the NFL, it's very hard for me to say that, yeah, this guy isn't one of the top players at his position in the league. So I have to go to Atkins.
There's no doubt about Atkins. I mean, there's just no doubt about him. I will say I don't know. He kind of caught fire towards the end of the year to get those 9 sacks. I mean, early in the year, he had a sack in the opener against the Jets, and then he had 1.5 against Miami, and then went another 3 weeks until getting one against Washington, and then another basically a month. And then he had 2 sacks against Cleveland, 1 against Pittsburgh, 1 against Houston, and a half against Baltimore. So he caught wind at the end of the year. I think he started slow, and I'm torn on this one, to be honest with you. I look at that, obviously Geno Atkins, and you say he commands double teams. Usually the thing that happens when he commands double teams is guys are getting sacks off the edge, and that didn't really happen this year, whether it's the lack of a rotation. Now, Will Clark stepped in early on, and he ended up getting 4 sacks this year, which obviously doesn't sound like much, but it was a good year for a guy that was a fringe roster player, right?
Yeah, and even Gilberry came in and kind of picked up some of that too.
So absolutely. And you look at Carlos Dunlap, he had 8.5 sacks, I think about 30 tackles, 35 tackles. So that doesn't jump off at you, but he had 15 passes defended, Scott. That's like more than some of the Bengals cornerbacks had. Is he in the conversation for you at all?
I think he has to, kind of like you said, it's obviously a sack position. I mean, that's the stat everyone looks at. It's kind of like certain positions of baseball that, you need to hit home runs or steal a lot of bases if you are, first base or center field or whatever. And yeah, his sack number didn't jump up. It went down from I think it was 13.5 last year. But the point you make, a pass deflection is just as, it's as good as a defensive stop. It's a, sack for 0 yards, essentially. You're stopping the passing play. And he definitely has an knack for it. I mean, he's developed, learned how to do that. So I don't know if I'd say he's the number one defensive player, but that definitely is something I think is very underrated that he has.
Yeah, and you just don't, when you think back to big plays on defense, you think back to interceptions, fumble recoveries, sacks, that sort of thing. You just don't think about a tipped ball on 2nd and 10 that causes a 3rd and 10, and then obviously the drive stalls out. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things that I think goes underrated with Dunlap. Yet when you look at a guy like J.J. Watt, that's like a type of number that he puts up in terms of batted balls. I mean, so I think Dunlap is up there at least in that category with Watt. Obviously, the sack numbers haven't been the same, but Dunlap's been a good guy. Michael Johnson has done a lot of that in his career as well for the Bengals, but not so much this year.
Speaking of Watt,
yeah, go ahead.
And one thing I'd be interested in, because I know you've been a very big fan of bringing in a edge rusher. If they could do a similar thing just with Dunlap's strength and size, if they could bring him inside sometimes and rush from the inside, if you had someone on the outside. But when you've got guys like Hunt and Clark on the out, it's really hard not to put Dunlap out there, so you never get a chance to see what he could do.
Yep.
If you had him and Atkins or something together, over the guards, and you put a couple traditional defensive ends.
And that's a great point, because when you look back a handful of years when they first had Wallace Gilberry and he had his most productive years with the Bengals, they had Frosty Rucker. They were able to kick in either Dunlap or those guys inside to do that. And this year it just wasn't the same. They weren't able to do it as much. And that you saw that in the sack numbers. Now things picked up at the end of the year, which is good and bodes well going forward. But you're looking now at a group. Dunlap, I think, is going into his 8th year. Johnson's going into his 9th. Geno Atkins is going into his 8th. These guys aren't young guys anymore. They're still effective players. They're still very good players, but they're not young guys anymore. And Evan Hill seems to be agreeing with us once again in the YouTube chat. Well, at least kind of with me. He has to go with Dunlap for Defensive Player of the Year. So I think it might have to do with those passes defensed and also what Dunlap does in the run game. Scott, I'm in agreement with you, though. This defense is not the same without Vontaze Burfict. It's just not. And whether it's his tenacity, his activity on the field, I think there was about 5 games in a row he had 10-plus total tackles. I mean, when he's there and he's on, he's a great football player, especially when he's not causing the team dumb penalties, which weren't too bad this year. But he's still Vontaze Burfict. But if you get another, that's kind of plays into the argument about number 9 going defense, get another stud defender, and all of a sudden you may have a Baltimore Ravens, Pittsburgh Steelers like defense once again on the Bengals if they get a defensive player. So I don't know. It's all interesting conversation, especially this time of year, right?
Yeah, and I think the big thing, like I know Peel mentioned Reuben Foster out of Alabama as far
right.
as having 2 linebackers, and I remember in the 90s the Bengals seemed to be pursuing linebackers, and they would get these guys who were supposed to be good linebackers. They had James Francis, Takeo Spikes, Brian Simmons, but the problem is they never had the defensive line. So the linebackers always got blown up and eaten up by the offensive linemen. So they never had a chance to do what you wanted to see them do. And it would be interesting. So because of that, I've always kind of been more of a fan of get the good defensive line, let whoever you have behind them roam back there. But then you see what someone like Burfict does. And you're like, wow, as long as you have a good enough line to let those guys roam free. And we still have a good enough line. It's not number 1 in the NFL because we do have some of those holes, but it's still a really good line. And yeah, it'd be interesting if one of those guys was the next Burfict, what you could do with 2, very dynamic, impressive guys that can just make, assuming, Foster someone is that guy, which obviously we don't know.
Yeah, and we don't know. And we've talked about this before as well, Scott. You look at the Bengals and their critical stretch when they were still alive for the playoffs, albeit a small pulse, but we're still alive in the playoffs. And this, again, not only ties into the defensive conversation, the defensive MVP conversation, defensive line, and what they should do at number 9 overall, but you look at weeks 11 through 17, Bills, they allowed 16 points. Ravens, they allowed 19 points. Eagles, they allowed 14 points. Browns, they allowed 10 points. Steelers, they did allow 24 points. Texans 12 points, and Ravens 10 points. So even with some of these perceived deficiencies in the defense, they still put the offense in a great position to win ball games. One thing I did note, and looking at the defensive MVP candidates and all of that, the explosive plays weren't there. The interception returns for touchdowns, the fumble recoveries for touchdowns, the interceptions that were, I mean, they had a couple of interceptions that were deep in opponents' territory, but just not some of those, sack, strip, fumble, and a recovery, that sort of thing. And that's something that they need to look at this year. Maybe the return of William Jackson and playing some corner and his athletic ability, as well as Andrew Billings, that'll help. But we'll see. We'll see. Interesting conversation. Scott, I want to talk a little bit about some news and notes. We do this every week, not only with the Bengals, just some brief stuff with the Bengals. Andrew Whitworth was added to the 2017 Pro Bowl roster. I think probably even with the offensive line struggles, deservedly so. I think he's always in that conversation. He gets overlooked by some of those top 5, top 10 picks that everybody seems to know, whereas he was a second-round pick and obviously plays for a smaller market team. So that's kind of some news and notes with the Bengals. Marvin Lewis also said the Bengals will be, quote-unquote, vastly different in 2017. We don't know exactly what that means, but those articles are up on Cincy Jungle, so check those out. And one other, it's NFL news, Scott, but it's also news that is pertinent to now. And the San Diego Chargers, and I wish Connor Howe was here. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here yet again this week. He's traveling in Italy, and I'm a little jealous. I wish I was in Italy, being of a little bit of Italian background. I wish I was in Italy with him. But Connor Howe couldn't be with us. He does live in San Diego County. He actually, aside from working for Cincy Jungle, he also worked for the Chargers. So he had kind of an interesting – he would have an interesting perspective. So maybe we can ask him this in the future as well. But the San Diego Chargers made the it's expected but random, the decision to move from San Diego and to Los Angeles. And personally speaking, I live in Southern California. I live in between Los Angeles and San Diego County. I live in Orange County. So not a Chargers fan by any means or anything, but I personally love the city of San Diego. I get to hear San Diego Sports Talk Radio. I, get to go on. I've talked to San Diego folks in the media, all of that. I feel bad for the city. I think it's a great city. I think they deserve a professional sports franchise. I don't know why teams keep wanting to move out of that area. I mean, the Clippers did so a long time ago. They moved to LA. They have the Padres still there. They have a semi-pro hockey team that's there, but they can't hang on to professional sports franchise. Now, granted, the Chargers were there, I believe, for 40 plus, maybe even 50 years. I don't have that offhand, but they were there for a long time. I actually went to a couple of Bengals and Chargers games over the past couple of seasons when the Bengals went down there. And although the stadium, if you've ever been to San Diego, you've been to what used to be called Jack Murphy Stadium. It's called Qualcomm Stadium now. In recent years, you look at it and it's a piece of junk. It really is. It's outdated. Even maneuvering. I had some front row seats at times. Even maneuvering from front row seats to get to a concession stand inside of the stadium was just super difficult to do. I think that the Chargers made a mistake. Now, I'm not privy to all the negotiations between the mayor, the city, and the ownership, the Spanos family, all of that. For those that don't really don't really have a pulse on the national scene as much as the Bengals, I will tell you that a number of Chargers fans are very upset. And there was some sort of press conference today. I believe it was in LA. A lot of upset Charger fans screaming profanities at the president of the Chargers and all of that.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. I was chatting about a little bit of my thoughts about the Chargers leaving San Diego. Before we kind of talk about a Bengals spin on this topic, what are your thoughts not only for the national landscape of the Chargers moving to Los Angeles, and do you think that it's over inundating the Los Angeles market to have two teams there?
First off, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to be without video for a couple seconds.
No
my
worries.
computer decided just out
We
of the
can we
blue.
can still hear your beautiful voice, buddy. It's all good.
It just said Windows would like to restart now. Bam. Anyway, it is kind of interesting because San Diego is one of the bigger metro areas. I was looking it up today, and it's number 17 overall. And you think generally you want to be in a high metro market, and there's nothing, south of LA now with football, and they've been there for 56 years or something. So without knowing all the politics, it does seem kind of crazy, especially when they're going to an area, LA, that has struggled historically to support NFL teams. NFL teams have left. The Rams went there. They struggled when they were there to draw fans either on television or in the seats. And now a second team's going there, and they're going in a little soccer stadium. So yeah, the whole thing just seems bizarre, and it just makes you think there's got to be something. Obviously, someone's pissed off at someone. Something happened behind the scenes. There's got to be something we don't know, because on the surface, it just seems like a beyond bizarre scenario.
Now you kind of kicked out there for a second, but I've heard quite a bit of things from San Diego Sports Talk Radio from where I live. I'm able to get that station and hear a lot of ins and outs that have happened. I obviously not inside the politics of it. I think the Spanos has played hardball, and then we go back to the election a couple of months ago here, and the voters did not pass a stadium initiative that was on the ballot down there. And I don't think that the Chargers wanted to waste another year of trying to reset, maybe playing again. I mentioned Qualcomm is not the nicest stadium, and they probably didn't want to play in that stadium another year. And it was just a stalemate. And so we knew last year when the Rams made the move to Los Angeles, we knew that the Chargers were eager to go to Los Angeles, but were denied that. And they had kind of a 1-year little continuation in San Diego. I will say I went live to the San Diego Chargers Pittsburgh Steelers Monday Night Football game, and granted the Steelers fans travel well, but there were a vastly more Steelers fans than there were Chargers fans at that game, and so that was kind of a shame to see. And like I said, I really like the city of San Diego. I really like going down there for games, and I kind of feel bad for that community. There's a lot of good people down there, a lot of ardent sports fans that really supported the Chargers even through these tumultuous last handful of years, and kind of, for a lack of better words, got screwed on this thing. So that being said, Scott, you live in Ohio, so this is a little bit of a different question for you than it is for me. Putting on our fanboy hats, we're both Bengals fans, obviously. We try and be a little bit unbiased as we write about the team on Cincy Jungle and do this podcast, but we obviously follow the team and we root for them. There was a time, if you remember, Scott, Mike Brown threatened to leave Cincinnati in the midst of the lost decade of 1990s and wanted to potentially maybe leave. Yeah, it's kind of the same deal, really, with the Rams and the Chargers, to be honest with you. I mean, neither of those teams are very good. But he threatened to maybe move to L.A. He threatened to move elsewhere, and if the county, it was Hamilton County, I believe, that if they did not grant the team a stadium and or give them a favorable deal. Now, obviously, they did. They got Paul Brown Stadium, which is a nice facility. It's hard to believe it's already been about 15 years since they opened up that stadium. But Scott, you followed this team for how long now?
Gosh, since I was
I don't mean to date you here, but
So I'd say the first game I remember seeing would have been on TV with my dad, maybe in the early '80s.
Okay.
So
So okay. So you're talking
when I was
about
younger, I didn't follow them as close as I do now. But yeah, I mean,
30,
yeah,
let's say 30 plus years, right?
yeah.
So if the Bengals were to leave Cincinnati and go elsewhere, whether it's maybe to Oakland, if the Raiders leave to Las Vegas, which is another topic, whether it's um, another city, maybe in Florida or whatever, would you still be a fan of this team?
I think that is a good question. I mean, on initially, I want to say no because obviously any fan is going to, instinctively wants to say no because they're pissed because hey, especially if they're a local fan. I mean, if you're, in London or something, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference because you you aren't there locally. But the biggest thing, especially local, is TV because even if you're not a season ticket holder, you have the local market games, and depending on where they move to, I mean, if they move from Cincinnati to Dayton, obviously they won it, but that's not a big deal. Like I said, if they move to Oakland if they leave, or San Diego or St. Louis, one of these bigger markets, Sacramento or Portland, then yeah, obviously they're not on your local market anymore. It's going to be much more difficult to try to follow them. And now everyone wants to get cable and then get, the Sunday ticket. So you're spending hundreds of dollars. And then, or if you go see a game, you're talking airplane flights and hotels and on top of the already high prices of tickets and, concessions and everything. So it just gets, you can follow them. It just gets so much more difficult. And so deep down, I think I would say, yeah, I would like to, I would try to. Obviously, I don't think I personally I don't think I'd follow them to the same level because you just aren't getting them on TV every day. You're not getting one local sports talk. You're not getting them, you're not getting the same access you do when they're right there. You don't get a, just zip down to the city and watch them during training camp. There's a lot of things you miss out on obviously when they pick up and move far away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing in this area outside of if you look at Cincinnati, they have like the metro, they have the smaller metro area kind of inside the 275 beltway, which is pretty much the, Cincinnati. Outside of there, once you get, some, I don't know, 10 miles, 12 miles from Cincinnati, you have several NFL teams within the area. You go south enough, you get the Titans. You go northwest a little bit, you get the Colts. You go northeast, you get the Browns. Directly north, you get Detroit. So if you are an NFL fan, a Bengals fan, depending on which part of the local area you're in, I could see some of those people eventually just kind of transitioning. Hey, the Colts are an hour and a half away. The Bengals were maybe 30, 60 minutes away. I'll just switch from this team to the other team because now they're on, the CBS every week instead of the Bengals. And so I just start following them. And you just kind of lose interest in the Bengals. And then also there is a huge Ohio State following out here.
Yeah.
So you still figure, okay, you've still got your Ohio State, if you're following Ohio State Saturday, Bengals Sunday, I could see, the local fans like, okay, I still follow Ohio State Saturday, and then Sunday I just follow the Colts or whoever CBS. Move on. You'd obviously have a lot of very pissed fans like you would anywhere, but I think for me it'd be hard to stay as as interested after 3, 4, 5 years. I think I would just have I'd slowly probably find myself moving on to one of the other local teams.
Yeah, like I said, I have a different outlook on this, just based on where I've been born and raised in Southern California. So I don't, I've the only times I've been to Cincinnati, literally, it's been I think 3 or 4 times, and it's been for a game. And I love the city. I love the city. I love the stadium. I've had a ton of fun out there. A lot of great people out there. So, if you live out there, you're good people to me. I don't know. To me, if they moved, say to, like you said, like maybe a Tennessee or a Florida or a, something of that nature, to me, that doesn't make all that much of a difference, even though I do like the city of Cincinnati. If they were to move to LA, strangely enough, I probably would not be as big of a fan, if at all, of the Bengals. And I'll tell you why. And this is super selfish and super weird. to say, but I'm kind of known around these areas, around this area, as the Bengals guy. I'm kind of the black sheep. Everybody likes their different teams. A lot of people like the Chargers. A lot of people, I kind of like the uniqueness of where I am and liking the team that I like. And that may sound totally egotistical, and I totally get that, but I don't find the Chargers interesting. I don't find the Rams interesting. Being that I have watched the Bengals for pretty much as long as you have, Scott. I don't like the 49ers. I'm not a Raiders guy. So if they were to move to LA, I don't know. I don't know if I could still root for them, at least on the same way that I currently do. And maybe it's because of a little bit of I have to really work, not only for the site and this podcast and all that. I have to work to find my information and get all of that. But I have to also work to get content and access to the team and all of that it's readily available to a number of different fans that can, that can get that on a regular basis, be it through the local news, newspaper, all of that stuff. There were years, and I know people have their qualms about DirecTV and all of that. There were years where I had to basically read box scores in the newspaper to find Bengals news. So I don't know. I kind of feel like I've paid my dues, and I don't know. It's kind of hard to put into words for me personally, but I just kind of find that I would not like them to move to Los Angeles. If they moved elsewhere, I probably wouldn't have the same kind of effect. Does that make any sense to you, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. It's almost, it kind of reminds me of one of those things, and I know it's not to the same degree, but you always hear, someone say, well, what would you do if you found yourself in a firefight in a war? Obviously, well, I'd take my gun, I'd stand there, and, obviously the first time people face live action, a certain percentage of people freeze or they turn the other way. And, or what would you, there was a show, wasn't there a popular TV show, What Would You Do? And they put people in these situations where they are confronted with their stage, but they don't know their stage, these unique situations. Like, you see someone yelling at someone or fighting them. Would you just walk away or pretend to ignore it? Or do you step up and do? So, yeah, I think it'd be very hard to say exactly what we do. But I think all the things we've talked about have made sense. Obviously every fan's going to have their own reaction. I think some of the fans locally would, because I think part of it too is that stadium deal you mentioned, is that especially the people in Hamilton County have been paying this ridiculous stadium deal, which pretty much everyone in any sort of sporting or financial industry has just, said it's, one of the worst stadium deals ever in the history of stadium deals. That if you're going to bend over and give this team this horrible deal to get them to stay in the midst of them having just this horrible decade. So you're showing them, hey, not only do we want you, but you've been horrible. You've been giving us a crappy product. We still want you enough to give you not only a stadium, but a stadium that is big time in your favor. And then you turn around and leave. I think that would just rub so many people the wrong way that they'd just say, okay, screw you. We just, yeah, you've burned the last bridge, or we are done with you.
I agree with you, and I'm going to throw another question at you. A little bit of a turn in this here, and it's from a YouTube chat member, and he's asked us a question before. Waldo, he actually, and kudos to him. I don't know if he's currently watching us from Mexico, but he says he watches the Bengals games from Mexico. But he brings up an excellent point. What if the Bengals moved and they changed their name and or their mascot? Would you then still follow the team and or root for them?
I think it depends on, that reminds me of the Browns situation. If they did that with the intention of bringing another team back to the Bengals. So if the current franchise left, and let's say they went to Portland and became, I don't know, the Portland Pumas or something. And then the NFL said, hey, that's cool because, hey, Cincinnati, in 2 or 3 years, we're going to give you a new team, new owner, new everything. It'll be called the Bengals. Would you follow the team that left, or would you follow the new team who doesn't have the history, the players, everything you followed, but has the name and the geography? I think that'd be I think I'd be inclined to follow the local team, only because that's a team you would have access to. And I assume it might be different for, in your situation, because obviously either way they would be far from where you're at. So you're not losing all the local content and access.
Yeah. If they were to leave and change mascots and or names, I would not be a fan of them anymore. Regardless of where they moved, I would not. Now, in the scenario you're talking about, if they maybe came back and where the Bengals had similar uniforms and all of that stuff, then I would probably give them a shot at being a fan once again. But it would probably take me some time. But if they moved and changed who they were, especially, I would not be a fan of that.
Is that assuming they're going to change the fight song too?
I don't know about that. I don't know. That's a good question. That's a good question. And that should be a good little trivia for us. If a fan can, we should have people submit their videos of them singing the Bengals fight song there. That'd be funny. What are your thoughts, Bengals fans? You can let us know. And we're going to put this up. I'm already calling it. We're going to put this up on Cincy Jungle as well. But would you be a fan of the Bengals if they left Cincinnati, regardless of where they went? Would you be a fan if they changed team names and maybe didn't get a franchise back in Cincinnati, or if they left Cincinnati, changed their team names, and got the Bengals back a handful of years later, like the Browns in Cleveland, as Scott mentioned? We would love to hear from you. I think this is a very hot button topic, even though the Chargers move is probably 2,000 miles away from Cincinnati. It still brings a little bit of a trip down memory road, I guess, Scott. It's a little bit different. But you can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI. You can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider at gmail.com. We're also on SoundCloud. You can download all of our content there. We're on iTunes. Download it there and comment there. And we're on YouTube. We're live on Cincy Jungle and YouTube every week. We're getting a lot of comments in the YouTube chat tonight, and a lot of viewers tuning in, so we're pretty stoked on that. But let us know. I really want to know your thoughts on this, because I think this is a very, very interesting topic. As we kind of close up shop here, Scott, I got a late tweet from Bill Stott, and this is kind of a little bit off the cuff here in terms of what we'll be talking about, but kind of going back to the draft talk. He said he would like a wide receiver opposite of A.J. Green, maybe trade A.J. McCarron for Brown's prior or Brown's second-round pick and first and rights to Josh Gordon if he returns. If Mike Williams, Clemson wide receiver, is there at 9, you take him. If not, trade A.J. McCarron to ensure we get Western Michigan's Corey Smith or a wide receiver like Juju Smith-Schuster. Any thoughts on that before we start to kind of close up shop here? I know there's kind of a lot to digest in those two tweets between Terrell Pryor, Josh Gordon, Mike Williams. I guess I'll just kind of say, if you had kind of your choice of those three, or maybe, I don't want to say settling for a second-round wide receiver like Smith-Schuster or the Western Michigan kid, would you have a choice on that?
I think I'd go the second-round receiver, only because I'm pretty sure Pryor's a free agent this year.
I think he is too, yeah.
Odds of them signing a free agent beyond, the veteran league minimum is probably 0%. So I'd see him getting some traction by NFL or by wide receiver needy teams, and I don't see the Bengals going in on that. I'd say Gordon at this point probably has as good of a chance of being reinstated as Justin Blackmon does for the Jaguars. So I think at this point he's just failed so many tests. And even if they do put a reinstatement date, just the odds of him staying clean for that point, unfortunately for him, I don't know. It just seems some guys just having trouble staying clean, and he seems to be in that boat where I would be surprised if he ever got back on the field. So that leaves you the other route, which I think is another second-round receiver. And then I think the question becomes, well, what do you envision Tyler Boyd? Do you see him as just a inside slot guy kind of working underneath, or do you see him as a number 2, kind of as like Marvin Jones was? And then based on what you see in Boyd, I think that would determine what route they go. If someone like Mike Williams was there at number 9, would they say, okay, we're going to run our offense where we're going to pass pretty heavy to feed Green, Williams, and Boyd, and Boyd's, kind of that third guy, kind of what they would use in a, the smaller receiver kind of role? Or would they say, no, we think Boyd is a legitimate number 2, therefore we don't see the need in taking someone like Mike Williams, even if he's there. We'd wait till the second round and see who falls to us, or, trade back from 9 to 25 or 30 and see what's available there.
Yeah, I agree with you on Gordon. I think you look at it and you kind of you start drooling a little bit, obviously, based on the year and a half that he had, where it was just like, whoa, this guy's incredible. But in an offseason where Adam Jones had an issue, and an offseason where you need some stability, you need guys that you can rely on to be on the football field, whether it's suspensions, injuries, all of that, I don't think Gordon is a route to go. I think, like you said, I think you maybe roll the dice in the draft, and then I don't think, in going to Pryor, I don't think he's a fit here, just because there seems to be a weird relationship between Pryor and the Bengals. We talked about that on previous shows, based on them trying to talk him into wide receiver. He didn't want to do it. He went to the Browns. He had a pretty good year, but he's obviously had these war of words with the Bengals corners, and that, that's a whole thing. I think you kind of start fresh, and you get, if those defensive ends start flying off the board before 9, Mike Williams is there. I think that's the pick, if not maybe even a running back. And then you look at, if they don't go that route at number 9, then you maybe look at the top of round 2 for another good complementary receiver. And then now you have Green, you have a rookie, you have Tyler Boyd. Maybe you reside in Brandon LaFell, and then you get Tyler Eifert, hopefully back from surgery, back surgery he had this shortly before the season ended. So I think in that case, then you'd be pretty well set. Do you agree?
Yeah, I'd think, given the Bengals' current management, I think that would be the most logical path, given their track record. I think one thing, too, with Pryor, that he obviously put up some good numbers this year, but with the Browns, I think the one concern I'd have with him, if they even decided to pursue him, and as you said, it probably wouldn't happen, is that you look at what the Browns have done, being so needy at the wide receiver position ever since Gordon's been out. That tight end, Cameron had that, one great year.
Yeah.
When they had no one else to throw the ball to, did nothing. Gary Barnidge, who had been a journeyman deep backup, and then all of a sudden the Browns have no one to throw to. He has a good year, and then same thing with Terrell Pryor this year, and it's mostly because of volume, because you've got to throw the ball. You're losing your games. You're losing by a lot. Your quarterback has to throw a lot. Someone's got to catch it, even if he's not a good receiver. And I think that's the one thing with Pryor would be interesting to see is, okay, is he truly a great dynamic wide receiver, or did he just, do what Barnidge at Cameron did? He just put up big numbers because they just have to throw the ball, and
because they're behind so often.
Yeah, and there's no one else to throw to.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, you've got to throw to somebody.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other thing, and I don't want to go too much into this, I know you and I maybe thought about kicking this around. Bill, Bill Stott on Twitter got in touch with us. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. He did talk about an A.J. McCarron trade. I don't want to get into the whole what's he worth at this point or any of that. I think that's going to be there was a lot of talk of that last offseason if he was going to be traded, especially after a good preseason and then, playing decent in regular season games and in the playoffs last year. Those talks will probably ramp back up again this year. And if the Bengals are going to be, quote unquote, vastly different, as Marvin Lewis said recently in 2017, maybe it's those trades and they look to get some value for him, a guy that's just basically sitting on the bench at this point. The one thing I want to ask you, Scott, If say there's trade options on the table, and the best offer in terms of a high pick or a potential player or whatever it is, the best offer on the table is from Hugh Jackson and the division rival Browns. Do the Bengals should the Bengals take that? Or should they maybe take a lesser trade to avoid the division rivalry? And Mike Brown's relationship with the Cleveland Browns, even though it's not Art Modell anymore. What should they do if that scenario happens to pop up?
I'd be inclined to take the trade. I know there's the old adage you wouldn't want to trade in the division, but at the same time, it's not like you're trading AJ Green or Perfect. It's a backup quarterback, and if you really felt he was that good, you'd be starting him over Dalton and trying to trade Dalton for a higher pick. And you're going to lose him at the end of the year anyway, because someone is going to offer him enough money to be a starter, and I don't think they're going to give him starter money to back up Dalton. So instead of having him for a year and losing him, or you face him twice during the season, I guess I'd rather face him twice in the season and get a second-round pick or a low first-round pick instead of not face him at all, or maybe face him once and get a third or fourth-round pick. Because I think at the end of the day, he's not Peyton Manning. He's not an elite. He's not going to turn the Browns from 1-15 to 15-1. So I would be perfectly fine facing him.
I'm in a good amount of agreement with you. I don't know if I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, obviously, if there is the chance that he becomes this guy that's a Tom Brady or something, then obviously you're like, oh, why did we do that? But based on the small sample size, I don't know that we see that. He has excelled in preseason. Then again, that's against 2s, 3s, and 4s, and did okay, when he filled in for the Bengals there. I agree too. I think he's a 5th-round pick. If you're able to get somehow a 2nd or 3rd-round pick for the guy, regardless of who's offering it, I mean, you're playing with house money at that point. So I think you look at it, and who knows? You roll the dice and you say he could be a very good quarterback for the Browns, or he could be a Kevin Kolb for the Browns. Meanwhile, you take that pick and you spin it into a productive wide receiver, productive defensive end, whatever, and that's kind of the risk you take with the trade. But if the Bengals are dead set on Andy Dalton being their quarterback, which it most certainly seems that it is, that is the case, then if someone's willing to give you quite a bit for your backup quarterback, then I think regardless of who it is, you take a hard look at that and maybe pull the trigger. What do you think, Bengals fans? Let us know. You can get in touch with us in a number of different ways. I've said it a number of different times on this episode. Please get in touch with us. Subscribe to us. We want to hear from you. We've had a number of different viewers and a lot of feedback on Twitter and the YouTube chat tonight. So we thank you very much for all of those of you who tuned in live. Keep your eyes glued to Cincy Jungle for all of the content we're putting up. I can attest to that. Scott, any final thoughts before you get out of here?
No, just have I was gonna say Merry Christmas. I'm trying to remember what I can't think of what's coming up this week. I guess there's no big holidays on the horizon.
Well, Valentine's Day is around the corner, I guess.
Yeah, although I guess that's probably 3 podcasts away.
Yeah.
If we count by podcasts.
Yep. Yeah, that's kind of how our calendar works, right? Count by podcast, not by yeah. Well, thanks for being here, man. I know you powered through it. You're dealing with the cold. I hope you feel better.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Check our stuff out on Cincy Jungle and those variety of different means, and we will see you later. Have a good night.